The government's massive program of modernization, bringing water and tower blocks to the desert cities conquered by Genghis Khan and Alexander the Great, is proving a more than effective answer to the call of Islam. Legend has it that the great 14th century warrior emperor Tamerlane warned that if anyone interfered with his grave, the world would, as he put it, tremble with unimaginable suffering. Almost 40 years ago, Soviet archaeologists did just that, and one day later the German armies swept into Russia. Rather more sensitivity and restraint marks the Soviets' firm approach to their 40 million Muslims as they try to at once control their strength and respect their traditions. With people from Muslim backgrounds expected to form 2/5 of the entire Soviet population by the year 2000, some Western observers argue that a threat to the country's internal security cannot be ruled out. But we found that on the surface at least, Islam here has become the opium of old men, that increasingly the younger generation are abandoning the faith of centuries, are being persuaded there is little need for it in a strong atheist society which, although on paper might profess to tolerate the gods of many religions, in practice recognizes and encourages none. And the government's massive program of modernization, bringing water and tower blocks to the desert cities conquered by Genghis Khan and Alexander the Great, is proving a more than effective answer to the call of Islam. As the Shah of Iran found out to his cost, those who would modernize an Islamic state should step slowly and with care. The Soviet Union has been doing just that for a full 60 years. In 1920, the first woman ever to appear on stage here in Tashkent was murdered. So too were any who dared to remove their veils in public. Now the region's stadiums have workouts for women athletes who would once have been stoned to death for daring to appear in public so scantily dressed. At one time excluded totally from public life, women now form 40% of the area's workforce. We came across these laying a new tarmac road just outside a mosque. Saw others acting as platform guards on the Tashkent metro. Found others in a factory doing the toughest and dirtiest of jobs, and still more in a local library, being given the kind of educational opportunities that caused so much Muslim opposition when introduced last year by the Soviet-backed government in neighbouring Afghanistan. And as they sprawl around the public lakes and recreation areas in the 100-degree summer heat, any traditional inhibitions these women might feel are clearly as minimal as their costumes. The children, head-shaven because of the heat, are now enjoying school holidays. But when back in the classroom, they plunge into a world of Marxist-Leninist ideology, in which political propaganda has completely replaced religious education. We have our own ideology. We don't need religion here, a senior local official told me. So more and more people, like factory worker Mohammed Jan, are growing up with the new way of life and being seduced by it. Born of still practicing Muslim parents, he himself no longer goes to the mosque. His cap is his only concession to the past. Complete change on the monumental scale envisaged by the Soviet government is by definition a slow business. In the Arab-type market, the old style of trading is slowly being replaced. Most have succumbed to the attractions of Formica shelving and a new covered market that would not be out of place in many Western towns. The Soviets claim that the standard of living of the Uzbek people is better than that of any of their Islamic neighbors. They point out that before the revolution, only 2% of them could read and write. Now the figure is 90%, compared, for example, to 10% in Afghanistan. Some Russian customs, like their love of gold teeth, have been imported along with their ideas, but the Soviets have gone out of their way to preserve many Uzbek traditions not associated directly with Islam. Uzbek eating houses, for example, with their highly exotic food, are spread throughout most towns and cities. And if the jukebox does offer the Rolling Stones playing Lady Jane, then at least it does so in both Russian and Uzbek. And the national dances of Uzbekistan are given the official seal of approval. Local pride in Uzbek nationalism, for generations bound up so closely with Islam, seems now to have been successfully prized away from it. And as Islam declines, the Soviets are confident enough to turn the finest mosques and religious schools into museums, into tourist attractions. Soviet Central Asia has only 200 large registered mosques. Before the revolution, it had 24,000. Only 1,000 registered mullahs, where once there were tens of thousands. Islam requires a believer once in his life to make a pilgrimage to Mecca. From the Soviet Union, only a few dozen make that journey each year. So the Ayatollah Khomeini and Saudi Arabia have actually suggested that the Soviet Union is an enemy of Islam. Where in their countries, for example, could you possibly contemplate, as here in Samarkand, a vodka factory nestling in the shadows of the mosques, with statues of two famous Muslim poets, Jalil and Navai, actually looking over into its backyard? But the allegations strike deeper than that into Islam's foundations, and the Soviets have gone on a propaganda offensive to try and disprove them. The latest edition of their glossy Muslim magazine, published in Arabic, Persian, French and English, quotes from the Quran, reminding readers that the person who doesn't work in his own interest and the interest of others will never receive any remuneration from the Almighty Allah. And at his Tashkent headquarters, the deputy leader of Soviet Muslims made it clear to me that in his view, those interests can even be those of an atheist state. He argues that here, as all over the world, many people are drifting away from religion, but claims Soviet Islam is stronger than critics suggest. The difference lies in social habits. People work and study, he says, and don't always have time to pray in a mosque. I asked if an Islamic revolution was possible here. Religious leaders should not interfere in politics, was the firm answer. Did that apply to Iran too? A smile, a pause, perhaps some embarrassment as he listened to our interpreter, and then the diplomatic reply: the Iranians must decide their own affairs. Critics say that Dr. Yusuf Khan Shakirov is one of the tame mufti permitted to operate in the Soviet system. We certainly noticed that a colleague took copious notes of his answers whenever I asked a question that was not on the list I'd had to submit beforehand in Moscow. And there has been talk of an Islamic underground, led by unofficial mullahs, that operates outside Soviet control. But it seems that the recorded prayers of the official mullahs will increasingly be left to echo around empty mosques, as the tourists take over from the faithful in a society where communism, not Allah, is great. Martyn Lewis, News at 10 in Soviet Central Asia. The production line of this Tashkent factory has an almost casual air about it. In a country that boasts it has no unemployment, these workers know their jobs are secure, know that they'll still be paid even if demand for the tractors they make for the cotton fields slackens off. As President Brezhnev himself has acknowledged, it's a policy that has contributed to falling productivity in Soviet industry as a whole, to poor quality work, bad management and a general lack of initiative. The average wage here is £124 a month, although a worker with extra qualifications can earn up to £200. But no overtime is allowed, and the government has decreed that the much-needed increase in output must come entirely from greater productivity. To achieve that, they rely more on simple persuasion than extra money. Output figures and targets dominate notice boards at the factory entrance. One tractor comes off the production line every 10 minutes. That's only 110 a day because there is no night shift. One group of workers starts at 8:30 in the morning and works through to 4:30 with a 1-hour lunch break. The other group go through from 4:30 to midnight, and because that's a shorter shift, they also work one Saturday every month. But usually the factory virtually closes down at weekends. Annual holidays amount to 18 working days, although I was told most workers here get 24. 40% of the workforce are women, like this quality controller. Even here on the production line, there are no rules about special clothing. And when I asked about a clothing allowance, they had simply no idea what I was talking about. The factory is considered modern, one of their showpieces, although there was no sign here of the computer technology or industrial robots, which the Russians say they are pressing ahead with every bit as fast as we in the West. The factory complex covers 150 acres and includes a wide range of on-site facilities. As well as a proper canteen, workers can buy for a few pence snacks of various pasties produced in the factory's own bakery and can eat them in the shady relaxation areas provided. On the way back to work, they walk past a special photographic display honouring the workers who have set new production records or come up with ideas for improving productivity. And they could hardly avoid the factory's very own war memorial, the reminder of past enemies reinforcing the need, as the government sees it, to all work together now for the good of communism. Some might go to the factory library. Almost half the 10,000 workers employed here go to evening school. And there's great emphasis on further education. An extra fortnight's holiday is the reward for passing exams. And to encourage the community spirit, most workers here live in blocks of flats specially built just a few minutes from the factory front gates, with their own play areas for children. But the actual running of Soviet factories is still plagued with organizational problems, not least of which are the bottlenecks that result in some products and materials lying around unused for months on end. Low growth has left officials freely acknowledging that the Soviet economy is facing its worst crisis since the war. And it may well be that the next 5-year plan will find room for capitalist-style incentives, such as those that already exist in agriculture, to give Soviet factory workers something more to work for. Martyn Lewis, News at 10 in Tashkent. This 30,000-acre cotton farm just outside Samarkand is one of 27,000 collectives which between them provide more than half the Soviet Union's agricultural produce. Improving their efficiency has been one of President Brezhnev's long-standing aims. Almost every farmer has tales to tell like the one about the combine harvesters delivered just in time for the crop gathering. Supposed to have been fully overhauled, not a single one had a battery, and unlike these, some didn't even have an engine. So output, while rising, has been unable to keep pace with the demands of a rapidly growing population, and that's despite £26,000 million ploughed into land improvement during the 5-year plan now coming to an end. Some of this farm's £3 million annual profit goes into incentive schemes for the 6,000 workers, and some into providing them with on-site services like schooling, a hospital and housing. Insofar as the Russian bear has any pots of honey for the average worker, then you could say they're to be found down on the farm. Farming families like that of Abdu Ghani, who's notched up 30 years here, don't notice the general food shortage as much as their comrades in the towns and cities. Not that they're totally protected from the rigours of Soviet life. On the wall in the bedroom, pictures of sons and brothers in the Red Army, a reminder that everyone must do at least 2 years national service. And from a party official on this farm came almost casually the first admission from inside the country of Soviet casualties in Afghanistan. Yes, she told me, she did know a family whose soldier son had been killed there. But she was visibly stunned when I put to her the Western intelligence reports of at least 1,000 Soviet dead. The media here have grossly underplayed the extent of Afghan opposition to the Soviet presence. When I discussed it, some called me a Western propagandist. Most pressed me keenly for more information. They're aware that prolonged military adventures might cut into living standards, and the acquisitive mentality is surprisingly strong. Seen in the 10 proudly polished cars awarded as prizes to the top workers on the farm. Incentives are the name of the game here, as Abdu Ghani is reminded every time that he sits down to eat. For his food comes entirely from his own private plot behind the house. And in a shed at the back, he's dutifully responding to the recent call by Soviet leaders to increase the number of cows on private plots. Although increasingly difficult to get, every citizen in this vast country has a right to a small private plot of up to an acre. Most are owned by people who work on collectives or the much larger state farms like this one outside Tashkent. The manager here had some unproductive land he didn't want. Local geologist Gani Mavlianov was looking for a private plot. He took over the land, discovered water, and in a few years turned the parched soil into an oasis, producing peaches, grapes, cherries, plums, apples and tomatoes in profusion. What he doesn't need, he sells in the local market, although usually the word spreads and friends and buyers come clamoring at his door. Astoundingly, Russia's private plots, covering less than 3% of farmland, are one of the most flourishing areas of its entire economy, yielding 30% of total farm output. Khrushchev used to complain that farm employees spent all their time and energy cultivating their private plots, but in recent years their role has been officially recognized and even praised. So, in a communist society, 55-year-old Norveika is one of millions breeding animals for private personal gain. Latest official statistics reveal that farm employees alone personally own no less than 60 million sheep, goats, pigs and cows, and several 100 million head of poultry. As one Western embassy official in Moscow remarked provocatively, "We'll make capitalists of them yet." Martyn Lewis, News at 10 in Soviet Central Asia.